Good morning, First Church. I am Deborah Klepp, and I'd like to share with you a few excerpts from a lecture given by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., delivered to the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly on May 16, 1966, in Hollywood, Florida. Quote, "Certainly, the church has a great responsibility because when the church is true to its nature, it stands as a moral guardian of the community and of society. It has always been the role of the church to broaden horizons, to challenge the status quo, and to question and break mores if necessary. I'm sure that we all agree that the church has a major role in this period of social change. I would like to suggest some of the things that the church must continually do in order to remain awake through the revolution. First, we are challenged to instill within the people of our congregations a world perspective. The world in which we live is geographically one. Now, more and more, we are challenged to make it one in terms of brotherhood. We must live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. This is a fact of life. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. Some years ago, Mrs. King and I journeyed to that great country known as India. I never will forget the experience. It was a marvelous experience to meet and talk with the great leaders of India and to meet and talk with thousands and thousands of people all over cities and villages of that vast country. These experiences remain dear to me, and it disturbed me. But my friends, I must say to you tonight that there were very depressing moments. How can I avoid being depressed when one sees with his own eyes evidence of millions of people going to bed hungry? How can one avoid being depressed when he sees thousands sleeping on the sidewalks at night? More than 1 million people sleep on the sidewalks of Calcutta and Bombay every night. More than 600,000 sleep on the sidewalks of Calcutta alone. They have no houses to go in. They have no beds to sleep in. How can one avoid being depressed when he discovers that out of India's population of 400 million people, some 380 million earn less than $90 a year? Most of these people have never seen a doctor. Many, if not most, have seen a dentist. As I noticed these conditions, something within me cried out, can we in the United States stand idly by and not be concerned? And an answer came, oh no. Because our destiny is tied up with the destiny of India and of every other nation. I started thinking about the millions of dollars that we spend each day to store surplus food. And I said to myself, I know where we can store that food, free of charge, in the wrinkled stomachs of millions of God's children in Asia, in Africa, in South America, in our own nation, who go to bed hungry. It may be that we spend too much of our national budget establishing military bases around the world, and too little on the basis of genuine concern and understanding. All I'm saying is this, that all life is interrelated, and somehow we are all tied together. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I can be what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of all reality. John Donne caught it years ago and placed it in graphic terms. No man is an entire island of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. He goes on to say, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore, send not to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. This realization is absolutely necessary if we are to remain awake in this revolution. End quote. May it be so.
In his 1967 book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. Justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love." This month in church, we're considering how liberating love centers our Unitarian Universalist faith. Liberating love removes everything that occludes love. Love that sets us free removes the constraints of pain and oppression and abuse and lies and sometimes literal bars. It removes everything that separates us from love. But what is that pesky thing I keep calling love? The theologian Paul Tillich defined power as the drive of everything living to realize itself, and love as the drive towards the unity of that which is separated. In Bell Hook's book, All About Love, she uses N. Scott Peck's definition of love, which is the will to extend oneself for the purposes of nurturing oneself or another's spiritual growth. Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, a Zen priest and the second Black woman recognized as a teacher in the Japanese Zen lineage, defined love as space. Williams said, "It is in developing our own capacity for spaciousness within ourselves that allows others to be as they are. And that is love." The humanist philosopher Erich Fromm posited that love is not primarily a relationship to a specific person. Love is rather an attitude, an orientation of character which determines a person's relatedness to the world as a whole. What is love? So in every new member class here at First Church, the very first thing that we do is engage in a theological exercise to explore love. At church, one of our calls is to make meaning together. And in fact, we did this exercise just on Wednesday with the winter new member class. So if there are folks in that class here today, just be patient while I catch the rest of the congregation up. So in church, we develop theology together. And that's, I know, a big word. It just means the study of God, I know, which is also a big word. But when I use that word, God, what I mean is the most powerful force in the universe. So you get to define that for yourself. What do you think the most powerful force in the universe is? Some people might say that it's change. Author and philosopher Octavia Butler wrote an entire series of books about how God is change. Other people say that the most powerful force in the universe is love. In Unitarian Universalism, I've heard both of these pretty commonly, but I think the most common word I have heard used interchangeably with God is the word love. And whether or not you believe that love is the most powerful force in the universe, it is what we understand as you use as the center of our faith and our practice in the world. It is the animating force for our tradition and what we try to do. So I want to invite you into a little Unitarian Universalist theological exercise. I want you to take a moment and think of a time when you felt truly and deeply loved. And if you can't remember a time right now, imagine feeling truly and deeply loved. When you remember or imagine, where was that feeling coming from? And what did it feel like? Did you feel it in your body? Was there a spot? What was the sensation? And as you remember that, what did that feeling cause you to do? Now, I want you to complete this sentence for me. You can do it internally, very valid. Also, I invite you to shout out. This is your moment to shout in church. Complete this sentence. Love is always. Love is always. Kind, free, connecting, safe, powerful. There are a lot of different answers, but that is what making theology is. We move from thinking to feeling to action to extrapolation. What is the meaning of this thing? One of the ways that human beings can sometimes avoid the power and transformation of love's call. One of the ways that we can avoid the movement of the holy in our lives is by requiring someone else to define it and then critiquing that definition. And instead of doing that, I want to invite us in to creating together, to using our experience and our wisdom to create our definition of what is holy and what matters and what is love, Instead of using our minds to distance it from it, let ourselves feel it and be moved by it to action. What would it be like if we truly allowed love, our experience of love, to guide what we do every day in the world? In 2021, the King Center, which was established in 1968 by Mrs. Coretta Scott King as a memorial as well as an educational and social change institution, in 2021, the King Center launched a campaign called Be Love. This campaign from the King Center called people to pledge to be love and allow love to drive your thoughts and words and decisions and actions, and honor the humanity of every human being. It asks people to pledge to speak the truth to power in love, to focus on defeating injustice, and to demonstrate a life of courage, care, and compassion as you boldly confront anything that stands in opposition to love. If you took that pledge, if you took the King Center's pledge to be love, what would that be like in your life? Every day, how would you live that pledge? What would you do? In the last several years of his life and his ministry, Dr. King's relationship with love kept calling him further into ever widening and more systemic change-making in the world. King began his ministry fighting for civil rights, for Black people in the American South. His love called him to organize, to overcome injustice, standing in the way of love. It drove him to tirelessly work for that justice, to put his body on the line and his family in harm's way, to face fear and violence and jail and death. And then that specific, that particular love, that beautiful burning love, clearing away the injustice that occluded it, it tunneled down in through the ground of being, and it came up into universal love. The reading that Deborah shared at the beginning of this sermon was from May of 1966. In April of 1967, Dr. King gave his famous Beyond Vietnam speech at Riverside Church.
From Beyond Vietnam. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all mankind. This oft misunderstood, this oft misinterpreted concept, so readily dismissed by Nietzsche's of the world as a weak and cowardly force, has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I am not speaking of that force which is just emotional bosh. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads us to the ultimate reality. This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. Let us love one another, for love is God. And everyone that loves is born of God and knows God. If we love one another, God dwells in us, and God's love is perfected in us. Let us hope the Spirit will become the order of the day.
Dr. King's understanding of love as the ultimate reality, his understanding that all children are our children, that we are bound up in one another in an inextricable garment of destiny, that was not new. Dr. King had made previous pronouncements against the Vietnam War, and his trip to India, where he experienced that horrific poverty and hunger of children in Calcutta that was described in our first reading, that trip was in 1959. Dr. King's moral system of love plus power, it went back to his days in seminary, when, according to King, quote, "As I delved deeper into the philosophy of Gandhi, my skepticism concerning the power of love gradually diminished, and I came to see for the first time that the Christian doctrine of love, operating through the Gandhian method of nonviolence, was one of the most potent weapons available to oppressed people in their struggle for freedom." He said that the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott was his first attempt to put these ideas into action to remove the injustice that was occluding love for Black people in the American South. In the last several years of his life, though, love was calling Dr. King to put these same ideas into more broad action. He and the Southern Christian Leadership Council began planning the Poor People's Campaign to fight what he called the triple evils of poverty, war, and racism. That Poor People's Campaign was radical. It called for the redistribution of resources away from the American military and into the economy for poor and working people in the United States. The Poor People's Campaign would have connected the power of the civil rights movement with the power of the unions. According to the California Labor Federation, the campaign was, quote, demanding $30 billion in 1968 annually to fight poverty. It was demanding full employment and living wage public jobs for all those who were unemployed. It was demanding a guaranteed minimum income for those who were excluded from the labor market because of their age or their caregiving responsibilities or automation. And it was demanding an increase in minimum wage to a living wage for all workers without exemptions, and access to land and credit for the rural poor. It was calling for the construction of affordable housing units and the immediate withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam. It was calling to redirect military spending to domestic reconstruction. The Poor People's Campaign was seizing the power gained with the right to vote and putting it into changing the material conditions of Black people and poor people and white people and fundamentally changing the material conditions of the United States of America. Dr. King traveled to Memphis in March of 1968 to launch the Poor People's Campaign. He was there to support African American sanitation workers on strike for a living wage and the right to form a union. He was there to launch a campaign that would upend the financial and military structures of the United States of America. He was assassinated on April 4th of 1968. Dr. King's relationship with love moved through his body and into action, where he gave his life to transform unjust systems that repeatedly got in the way of love for Black people and for all people. These unjust systems that we're living in harm everyone, and upending them, transforming them so that the systems are based on love instead of domination, liberates us all. This is what the call of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is about. It's not a memorial to a single man's life, nor is it a tribute to a struggle from another time. It is a day of practice, a day of calling us into living into Dr. King's legacy, into living into the call that he made real in his own life, the call of love to remove everything that gets in the way of love. But it's not just about removing violence and threat. It's also the call of everyone getting to have a thick red stew for a very good dinner. It's the call of everyone having access to health care and medicine and housing and education, but more than just the material conditions, it's the call of love to hope and creativity and imagination and human connection and love in the biggest sense of the word. Love that is about putting ourselves forward and making room for one another's spiritual growth. That call was radical. It was society upending. It was dangerous. And it still lives. That call to be love in our lives and in our institutions, it is still here. It is inviting us to be love, to upend the institutions of discrimination and racism and capitalism and patriarchy. Bell Hooks wrote, "The moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. That action is the testimony of love as the practice of freedom. For we free ourselves too when we choose to love. We free ourselves from the box of lies that Eric talked about. We free ourselves from the illusion of separation, and we free ourselves from the constraints of systems of domination. We live liberation when we live love, because we start dusting away the cobwebs of every dirty system that occludes it. This world-changing love, it always starts small. It always starts local. It always starts specific in relationship with the people in front of you. Tomorrow, on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, the anti-racism team is heading over to the table for a Dr. King celebration, and we hope that you'll join us. We'll be serving lunch to the guests. That means assisting in the kitchen, setting up, serving it, cleaning up, washing dishes. It's local, it's specific, it's relational, and it's what we've been asked to do by our friends here in Milwaukee. Deborah has some flyers if you want to learn more. It's also printed in your orders of service if you'd like to join us. And in March, our team is leading an anti-racism training here at church, focusing on how we can change church systems. Love is big. Love is huge, sometimes overwhelming. It's powerful and universal, but it's also small. It's local, it's concrete, it's particular. As Reverend Dina said last week, we begin to love the whole world by loving the person right in front of us, building relationships that build power to change systems, from being run on domination to being run on the power of love. Love and freedom are interwoven with one another. Amen.